Thank you so much, everyone, for attending the last session for this semester for Hear from Peers Spring 2025. I am happy that everybody's here, and we will have our speaker today, Larry Opala. He is, hold on, let me pull my cheat sheet. All right, so give me a second. Okay. Larry Opella is a technical lab coordinator for Texas A&M Engineering Academies throughout the state and lab instructor at the Austin Partner College. Before transitioning to a role in academia, Larry spent decades as a forward-thinking professional with accomplished pre-sales and post-sales experience in communication technologies. As a business advisor on strategies, risk assessment, and advanced technology, he developed a broad tool set that suits his role today. His experience motivating cross-functional, multinational teams serves him especially well connecting to students and challenging them to grow foundational engineering skill. Today, we will hear from Larry about how generative AI being used for report generation, I believe, for the course that he handles. So I will just give the floor to Larry to present his work.
Thank you very much, Armando. Yes, as was mentioned, I'm with the engineering academies. If you don't know about those, there's a little bit of information. You have some links. You can go learn a little bit more about it. But it's a program with community colleges around the state, up to 10 now and growing, to be able to connect students that might not have the opportunity. They can save a lot of money, for one thing, by staying locally, by not having to have all of their courses through Texas A&M. So while I'm based out of Austin and teach some of the lab facilities at 216 and 217 labs, some of the first engineering labs that you would have. I also travel around. I happen to be traveling this week, so I'm up in the Fort Worth, Dallas area, attending to some of those different academies. So yeah, if we have a little bit of rain here, the connection goes bad, that's what's going on from the Dallas area. Hopefully that's not an issue. I'll have the presentation short outline of what we're going over. In the interest of time, I won't take much time to go through it here, but I suspect these will be made available so you can look yourself. Really trying to get an understanding of what we did, or what we're trying to do, and building to the results and some takeaways that I think really apply. As I said, there's some information about the academies. Here's some information about the courses as well. Just to give you a context, I noticed that several people that were in this cohort weren't necessarily from the engineering side of the world. So it's important to see that. The big thing that you would take away from this particular slide is that there are 10 partner colleges, and that the classes are consistent with what we do on main campus. They just happen to be at the partner college. So in every academy location, there's A&M faculty, staff that participates in the teaching of those courses, 102, starting with 102, their basic introduction to engineering, and then includes the 216 and 217 labs, which hopefully some of you have taken because they're just so much fun. Well, spoken like an engineering physics major. Okay. Oops, a little bit too fast there. So I wanted to level set, because I take the time to level set with the students what artificial intelligence is today, and how particularly it is different than generative AI that we talk about with ChatGPT, since it became famous, or the other different tools that you have to operate with generative AI. So while we talk about things like Grammarly as an editor tool, or even while you're typing emails these days, you often get many suggestions to improve your grammar. That is a type of AI. I'm going to lump that as an editor, not generative AI, although it is suggesting things that you can do. But the advent of large language models being able to take in a large amount of data and predict the next word that is most likely to follow is what generative AI is built on. So that is the foundation of what is today. And I'll note that there are several people that talk about machine intelligence, which is a step above and beyond generative AI. And so that's not what we're talking about at the moment. We're talking about the large language model tools that generative AI uses today to generate content, generate reports in this particular case, because in the lab reports, in the labs that we work on, they have to generate a report to generate a grade, to earn a grade. So when we talked about introducing the topic to the students, we also then asked, so just show of hands, tell me who's heard about this, who's using it, what's going on in life outside, because we know that you've got some background knowledge, especially the further we get from the introduction of ChatGPT. So per class discussions, about 1/2 of some students, most students have an idea of what it is, particularly given them a little bit of language to understand the difference between Grammarly and a generative AI tool, or an AI editor and that tool. And then as we talk about how you might use this, what's going to be important in writing the labs, and how many of the students think they might actually use the generative AI tools to develop their reports. As it turns out, about 1/4 of them raise their hand and say, maybe we're thinking about it. But a lot of them will comment, well, if we have to be the ones that do the reports, we're the experts on the reports, we need to make the outline. If we're going to write a good prompt for the generative AI, then I'm not sure how it's going to be smart enough to do the report. So there's an interesting tension there between people who think, well, isn't that cheating in some respect? And some people saying, I'm the expert, why would I want to go to generative AI? And others who say, might be interesting, I might give it a try. So from my point of view, as an instructor point of view, what we're trying to encourage is that they understand generative AI tools. We're neither encouraging or discouraging the use of it, but if they use it, we have an extra appendix that is required that they fill out. So that's the intent, to get them to understand what it is that they're doing, how they're using it, and use it in the same way that they use an authoritative source and generate a reference if they're actually trying to do that, or a citation if we're. So given that kind of background, probably helps to put it in a picture here to get the flow of generating a report. Typically, I would ask the students to come to class prepared, understanding what they have to do to collect data, be able to ask questions so that they get a good foundation for getting the information necessary gathered to actually write a report. In that stage, there's an opportunity. So there are two main opportunities to use generative AI. And I think that's a reasonable stage to use generative AI to do some research, to think about some of the keywords that they're going to be investigating, and actually research and investigate with generative AI. Because these days you do a search on the internet and you get a generative AI response, whether you want it or not. So it's a reasonable opportunity. In that case, we're not asking them to report, because that's not generating the report. What we're asking them to do is use the tool properly, think about what they get for input, but I'm not asking them to do anything as far as documenting that. Beyond that, they go do the data collection, they go to their lab stations, they collect data, they have to analyze the data. Again, some of the research that they did may be a good fit, a good filler for giving them some background for that analysis. I always warn them that they should have an authoritative source and make sure that the equations that they might research about actually apply to the thing that they're doing. It's something in engineering that you sure wouldn't want to just grab an equation off the shelf and apply it. I tell the students, if you do that, that's, I guess, okay, but I just don't want to drive across your bridge or fly in your plane or any of those other scenarios that you could think of that might not be a good idea. From those bits of data collection and analysis, they're then tasked with generating a lab report. They generate a draft. From the draft, it's possible, it's reasonable to think that they could use that and add it into generative AI as part of a prompt and generate content. They would need to review the content, but if they do, they need to complete the Appendix AI. If they don't, then they move on to their lab report, and there's no reason to complete that appendix because there's no reason that there's no generative AI included in their report. So if you have that general understanding, then we have project guidelines that we also give them. Basically filling out that generative AI tool is going to tell me what sections you used it on. It's going to tell me what prompt, at least initially, you put in to the generative AI tool. And then I'd also like them to list things that were completely wrong, that didn't make sense. I'll say that you were lied to about, because many times when I've used generative AI, I find that the tool lies. There's a nicer word for it, hallucinates. But when I tell it, no, that's not right here, please consider, it says very politely, oh, I'm sorry, and then it lies to me again. So I'm going to call it straight out. It makes stuff up because it's trying to, LLMs, the large language models, are trying to add words on the best fit next word, not necessarily something that's an authoritative source. So from there, we can go over these points. The slides are built so that you can take a look and think about the intent of each one of these items that I've talked about. In this case, the intent of looking for the graders of AI. I'm not thinking that the tools are very good, but I am thinking that if you don't have at least 70% human generated, that you probably ought to do some more work on generating your own work, because we're looking for critical thinking, especially as an engineer, and as foundational steps as an engineer, we'd like you to build that critical thinking. And if you're just taking a large portion of what was given to you by some tool, then you're not doing the critical thinking needed. So it's not that we're looking to look for a particular number, but we are looking to say that you put in significant amount of work yourself and not had most of the work that you're putting into your report generated by the AI. If we're looking for prompts, the intent there is to have you think about the prompts. You have to create much of the work anyway, and not just ask the AI, write me a report on this topic. We want to make sure that there's more of an outline of the work that they did, so that it's really representative of their work and not some generic work that the AI has done. On that, we give them some tools. I was taught some of these tools within the cohort. You may remember them yourself on the video about prompt engineering. I think this is really critical, and before we encourage students to use generative AI, we should teach them prompt engineering. Since we don't have courses on that today, I would recommend this would be one of the takeaways that we can think about. And as you've noticed in that slide, I encourage them to go learn about generative AI prompt, even if they're not going to use it for their reports, because I really believe they should be using generative AI, and they just need to use it intelligently. Let's see. So from there, we're talking about including the draft. That intent is to provide that authoritative information and make sure that they should check it to get an idea that what they're getting might not be correct. And these days, you go look, if you do research, you're likely to find some information that conflicts. And if you do, you need to sort that out. So please think about what you're looking at, think about what you're getting fed back, and make sure that it makes sense within other things that you've learned. And then finally, the tools have gotten better, but when this was the idea first came up, generative AI from ChatGPT, for example, did not give you the source that it got its information from. I think the Microsoft version was much better about that, but we were looking for that authoritative source to be given as part of the output. So, interestingly enough, when we talked about citations, I looked up the citation that they would have for generative AI. We asked them to use the IEEE style for citations. And even today, and I went and looked this up recently, but as of August, when this was signed, There was not a good example for generative source through the IEEE citation standards. So I've looked recently and there still is not one. And so this is a real shortcoming about how we're going to be able to cite these sources, particularly noting that the source will change and it might not, using the same prompt, you might not get the same answer even a few minutes or an hour after you've used it to begin with. So if you're thinking about generative AI and you want to cite it to give it credit, as you should, then there's a real difficulty in the version of the internet is changing, and so you might not be able to do that. That's just a problem to think about going forward. So more interestingly now, some reports by the numbers. Let me move smiling faces out of the way so I can see this a little bit better. So what you can see is that we had over 100 students, 122 students, and we extended this from the fall into the spring because we had so few people actually trying to use it. While they thought they might, they decided maybe they wouldn't. And so we had 2 people over the course of the fiscal year, well, the calendar year, fiscal year in this case, of the fall and spring session. So just not very many students use it. I actually built this slide and then had to update it because one group decided on their next to last lab report to go ahead and use this. Interestingly enough, Professor Shaw, who I should have mentioned earlier, she's the professor of record, the professor at the Engineering Academy in Austin. And so I work with her, and it's her labs that I end up teaching. So in the lecture part, there's also several opportunities for homework. And as it turned out, nobody used ChatGPT or generative AI for any of those assignments. It was only on the lab reports that it was attempted, and it was, as you can see, very sparse. Interestingly, even one student, unfamiliar, thought, well, isn't that a violation of the Aggie Honor Code? We really made sure to explain that that was not, as long as you gave them credit, you did the Appendix AI work, just tell us that you're using it. So interestingly enough, I'm not going to take the time to read this at all, but just to show that some students, it's not a matter of ignorance, it was a matter of choice, or seems to be a matter of choice. And this was somebody who gave me feedback. I asked for specific feedback, and this was a person to say, yes, I've used AI, and by the way, it really helped me do some great work on a science side project that I had. But it's not something I thought was worthwhile doing because it doesn't make sense for me on this lab report. So the biggest thing I take away from that is that the onus of satisfying and writing the Appendix AI and adding it to the lab report seemed to be a hurdle that a lot of students said simply, well, that's not worth the effort. I'm the expert. I need to know what I'm doing anyway. We're working teams, so we all take the time to write the report. Why would I use generative AI at all? It just doesn't seem to make sense, especially for extra work that I have to do to build out the Appendix AI. It's not that it's a lot of trouble, but it's extra trouble. The other thought that I think was an important takeaway was to imagine what generative AIs could actually provide if the information they were providing wasn't authoritative. So the idea that if A&M was to build their own generative AI tool, which was populated with authoritative data, which I could trust as a student, rather than talking about what's out on the internet, then it might be a lot more interesting for me to use. But at this point, I'm not sure I can trust the internet, so I'm not going to worry about that. The last thing was that ultimately, generative AI is very little help writing that custom lab report because those students were the experts. So in the slide set, you'll see here's the Appendix AI, what is required of you. Again, gone over it generally. I won't go any further with that. So I hit my time mark, then that should have been about the amount of time to cover, give you a shotgun approach there, or turn on the water hose. And if you're drowning now, okay, we'll take a break. We will take a short break, take a breath. I will take a breath, And if you have questions, I'll follow up.